We will now commence the review. Big Finish time, and I'm tackling the one that I have had so many people from long before I got into Big Finish tell me that I should do: spare parts. Now, I went into this with more than a little trepidation. Not that I didn't expect it to be good. Everything I'd heard indicated to me it was going to be good, but I've had things overhyped for me before, specifically in regards to Doctor Who, and specifically in regards to classic stuff. And I know Big Finish is a little bit different from classic. I do appreciate that. But I've had classic episodes that people, that I keep seeing at the top of best of all time lists. And then I see them and I'm like, it was fine, because I suffer from overhype on those things. And I really went into this afraid that I was going to deal with the same kind of thing here. Coupled with that is the fact that I know a fair amount of World Enough in Time, which was a recent episode that I absolutely love, borrows a lot of elements or concepts and mood from this as well. So I didn't know if I was going to go in not only having to combat hype, but having to deal with the fact that maybe I've kind of already seen this story. Thankfully, though, this is really good, really unnerving, really, really creepy. And it in regards to its relation to World Enough in Time, it borrows, that episode borrows a fair number of the core ideas and definitely the vibe of the thing, but it's not literally retelling that story. And so the pieces are assembled in a slightly different manner and are also dealing with different characters, because we have the Fifth Doctor with Nyssa, and that whole dynamic is completely different from the Doctor and Bill. So that also helps differentiate it quite a bit as well. You can definitely see where the connections are, but one does not feel like a retread of the other, which I think is actually speaks to the strength of both pieces. Now, I do try and avoid spoilers when I talk about Big Finish, because I don't have the same expectation that as many of my viewers have heard these audios as I can usually expect for them to have seen when I actually talk about a Doctor Who episode. So there are some things that I want to talk about that are spoiler, but I will save those for the back end, and I'll try and talk broad right now. I'm enjoying Peter Davison in this, and in general, I think I'm enjoying him in the audios more than at least most of the stuff that I've seen him in the show. And if you've seen my ranking of the Doctor, you know my feelings. Davison, in his time on the show, had an artificiality to his performance that didn't work for me. A lot of his reactions felt very manufactured. They didn't feel particularly genuine. And that's not necessarily a incorrect way to play the Doctor. It just didn't work for me. And I think a lot of it might have just been his youth and sort of where he was as an actor at the time, because the stuff that I've heard him now on Big Finish, this is my second one hearing him, or, even the short Time Crash, I like what he brings to the Doctor as an older performer a lot more than how he connected with me with his time on the show. But at the same time feels very much like the same character. So he does really good. There's a wonderful balance of him, his arrogance, his aloofness, but also seeing through the cracks in that, and his frustration with things. And he has his little moments of being witty, but he also, especially in this story, you feel the tension of what's going on, because he knows how bad this whole situation is. Nyssa coming back was interesting. She is a companion that I know. I'm still filling in my classic Who knowledge. There are some companions I have yet to encounter at all. I do know Nyssa, and I always kind of liked Nyssa, so it's nice having her back. She works really well. The supporting cast is also really, really good on this. There's sort of several key supporting cast members. You've got this sort of slightly skeevy black market kind of guy called Thomas Dodd, who I really liked. I like his dynamic. He is that kind of slightly skeevy, but you kind of feel like, I almost said like he has a good heart. I'm not sure if that's true, but the situation, he has human responses. He has very relatable reactions to a lot of what's going on, but is also still at the same time a skeevy guy. So there's a couple of periods where he's paired off with the Doctor that I found their dynamic really interesting and really intriguing, and I enjoyed him a lot. You've got the Hartley family, brother, sister, father, who are sort of our key into the human level of the tragedy of this story of the origin of the Cybermen. And I'd say that's almost kind of a spoiler in and of itself, but it's really not, because they put a Mundus era Cybermen right on the cover of the darn thing. So you know going in that's what you're getting. So, you know, this is our key in, and the characters we get to relate to, just being on the ground floor and watching this civilization become the recurring Doctor Who villains that we all know and maybe love and maybe are terrified by. So, I mean, they have a very clear structural part to play in the story, but they're performed really well, and there are some things that I'll talk about later on that really do sort of have a serious impact, because you get to do it through the lens of this family. You've then got some more of, you're sort of, boy, I don't know how much I sympathize with these people, because you've got this woman who's a recruiter and she finds candidates for conversion, and then you have the actual human being who is working on creating these conversions and is effectively making the Cybermen. And she's really interesting too, because she is just, I mean, she is so clearly given up, and she's doing what she's doing because, well, what else is there to do? But like, she clearly doesn't want to think very much about what it is she's doing. She's accepted that it has to be done, but she doesn't want to think about it. Hence why she is always drinking. And again, that's a really fascinating dynamic, and it adds another layer, and it's another sort of angle to come at this character and this setup that I wouldn't necessarily have expected, and it feels more real, it feels more human. If I were to compare it with something like, say, Genesis of the Daleks, which is an episode I haven't reviewed, and I don't know when I'll get around to it because it's one I've already seen, and my classic stuff, I'm right now focusing on ones I haven't seen before. But to do it as a comparison, the Genesis of the Daleks story doesn't feel especially human. I don't mean that as a criticism, but the whole, military complex of these people who will be turned into the Daleks, and then Davros as their creator, doesn't feel particularly human. It feels like these are responses in terms of how they're dealing with things, and certainly Davros particularly, where there's obviously some very twisted and warped thinking going on. Whereas here with the origin of the Cybermen, all of it feels much more human in terms of how it was we got here, which in a way is what makes it a heck of a lot more creepy than the Daleks. Not necessarily better villains overall, but I think the Cybermen are creepier, especially when Doctor Who focuses on their origins and how they came to be, because you know enough about the setup and you understand exactly how we got here. And it's hard to argue that if humans today were put in a similar situation, that we wouldn't end up with a similar end result if it was an option to stave off extinction. And of course, we've got Nicholas Briggs doing all the Cybermen voices, and he's just, he's built for this. He's great at it. So pretty much all of it works, and it's creeping and it's unnerving. And if you, and also like at this point, having this is now my third audio drama that I've listened to, and I've gotten very much into the rhythm of it. So I'm following it as a sort of general method of storytelling better than I did, the last few times that I've listened to these. That said, there are still a couple of points towards the end where things do get a little bit chaotic, and it's a little bit, you're kind of going, wait, what is it that I'm listening to? What's going on? And I think sometimes when they try and recreate the more actiony moments that you expect from certain Doctor Who stories, it gets a little bit muddled. Not impossible to follow, but a little bit, but I mean, that's pretty minor. And this does pretty much live up to the hype. I do say pretty much because I have some nitpicks, but those are going to get into spoilers, which means I am now getting to spoilers. So if you haven't heard this yet, I recommend take this as my endorsement of it. Go listen to it. And I'm assuming you've done that, or you have gone away, so you're not going to get spoiled. Okay, here we go. Before I get into my nitpicks that are involved in the spoilers, let me talk about the part of it that hit me the hardest personally. And that is the conversion of the family member, the sister in that family, Yvonne. That hit me really hard, and I was surprised that it did, because I saw it coming. I mean, you can see it coming from a mile away. And as soon as you get introduced to this family, you're like, somebody in this family is going to be converted. We know that. And as soon as she gets taken away, like, okay, it's her. But there's something about the execution of it and the way it's built up. And that she gets mostly converted, but her programming isn't in place, and she's grasping to what little bits of her life she can remember, and she wanders back to her home where her father and her brother, and also Nissa, are, and there's just this kind of electronic whimper, and the father tries to connect with her and gets a little bit, because she didn't get fully properly converted, but at the same time it's very clear that his daughter is dead and he's clinging to a ghost practically, and there's a dual tragedy to the lingering bits of humanity that you can hear in those sort of electronic sobs coming from her, and also the father, and I mean the brother as well, because he sees her and he had wanted to be converted. He didn't fully understand what it meant for that to happen, but he was jealous when she got taken away to go through the process. He thought it should have been him. He thought he could be a hero because of what this society thinks the Cybermen mean or will mean. And that is really hard and really painful and really, really tragic, and probably hits me a lot harder now than if I had listened to it before I had a kid of my own. But as someone with a kid, that choked me up legitimately, and that was hard to listen to in a good way, in an emotionally affecting way. As far as nitpicks and complaints, the third out of the 4 episodes, the one I just talked about, is, I think, the best one. The 4th one is unfortunately probably the weakest. And it's not because the whole thing goes off the rails, but there are a couple of moments that end up taking the wind out of the thing for me. And again, not massively. It doesn't derail. It still works, but a bit like how The Doctor Falls felt like a letdown following World Enough in Time, this last entry in Spare Parts feels like a letdown coming off of the build-up of the previous 3, and that 3rd one especially. But it is still good, just not as good as what came immediately before. So, some of the moments that kind of, like I said, took the wind out of the sails a little bit. There's some weird moments with Dr. Allen. Who's the creator of the Cybermen, effectively. Like I said, I love her characterization and the fact that she's kind of a drunk who's kind of given up on the morality of the situation, and she's just gone completely pragmatic, but is basically drinking to numb her own pain and guilt and everything else involved in what it is that she's doing and everything that's going on. But she has a couple of moments in episode 4 that feel borderline Davros-esque, and they feel very out of place with sort of what came with her before. And they're fairly fleeting, but there's 2 or 3 of them in that episode. So I don't think it's a fluke. They have a couple of weird specific moments where she just says things, or she tries to briefly work against the Doctor, and the way it plays out doesn't feel right for this character and this situation, and what makes these Cybermen effective, that they feel very human in their origins, as opposed to like I said, with Davros and the Daleks being based on Nazis and intentionally feeling very inhuman. When she has little moments of "I created this," I'm like, where the heck did that come from? And another moment that, and it was a quick moment, but it kind of made me go, wait, what? Which was a moment the Doctor had. And he has a line, I may not quote it exactly, but it was something to the effect of, "It starts with an artificial hip and breast implants, and where does it end?" I'm sorry, what? And it's one of those things where, and honestly, a bit like Oxygen, when the Doctor said, actually calls out capitalism as the problem and why the scenario happened. It's the same root issue, which is that point was already there. It was in place. It was in the subtext. But when you take the subtext and you make it text, you say it out loud, not only are you sort of losing the strength of having it just as an underlying message, but suddenly your subtle subtext sounds stupid when your characters say it out loud, because it goes from this thing that you're implying and it's there for the audience to make the connection and go, oh, to suddenly you just boom, You get it? And I hate that. I do hate. I hate that line. I hate that moment because it is making a point with a sledgehammer that had been made with such a delicate touch up to that point, and just out of nowhere, kong. And I was listening to it, and I think I was on my lunch break at work, and that was the fact that there were other people around was the only reason I didn't go what out loud, because I really hated that line. But like I said, that is admittedly nitpicking. I'm literally getting worked up about one single line in the thing. Now, it is a line that frustrates me so much that it's there that I'm, it's the sort of thing that if this were a movie, I'd do a nitpick rant video on it, because it is just this one thing, but I really have issues with this one thing. But I do think this is overall pretty much does live up to the hype. The first 3 episodes, definitely. The fourth one, like I said, it dips slightly, which is a bummer, but it is still really, really good. And the creepiness is absolutely there, and it's at the forefront. And yeah, I mean, it's just well put together, well performed, well written, except for that one friggin' Lauren. And absolutely very glad that I checked this one out. So that's it for this month's Big Finish. Next month, I will be doing a Big Finish as selected by my patrons. Because yes, I'm on Patreon. I'm gonna plug it, so sue me. But Spare Parts, have you heard it? What did you think about it? Whatever your thoughts are, drop something down in the comments. Let's talk about it. Do all the stuff! Like, subscribe, I got a Twitter, and I got a podcast, and I mentioned the Patreon already, and all that stuff. There's links down below. So until next time, this council is adjourned.